Hi, everyone. Thank you, Taylor. Okeri Ko'u'inoau, Hana'au, Southeast Alaska Tribal Ocean Research. No Hawaii Me'au, no Ha'au I Sitka. So, hello, everybody. My name is Kari Lanphier. I live and work here in Sitka, but my family is actually from Hawaii. And so I like to say that, like a salmon, I just strayed a little bit, and I ended up on a cold island instead of a hot one. So this time of year, I'm starting to debate if that was the right choice. No, I'm just kidding. Super grateful to be here with you all today. We're about halfway through. This is the second talk on Saturday, so I'd really like if we could give just another round of applause for the speakers yesterday, the speakers coming up today, and the speakers tomorrow. There's lots of great work out there. Also, I'd love if we could give a round of applause for the folks putting this wonderful symposium on, the Sitka Sound Science Center. Thank you for all the work that you've done for bringing us here today. A round of applause for those folks, too. There's a ton of work that goes into this in the background. The speakers have access to a little green room over here where they give us some food, and there's grapes. And I don't know, you all probably know how expensive grapes are. So they bought grapes for us. So I was like, wow, this is the first grape I've had in 6 months. So really grateful. As I mentioned, I work with an organization that's called the Southeast Alaska Tribal Ocean Research Consortium. It's a tribal consortium here in Southeast Alaska, so I work with tribal environmental programs all throughout this region, throughout Southeast. And really my job is to be responsive on, hey, what do we see as the environmental programs or the environmental problems that are impacting your tribe? And we try to augment each other's work and work together to address that. And one of the big problems in the last few years is the European green crab. Primarily, though, the talk that I'll be giving today, I'm very humbled and honored to be up here to be sharing the work from the Metlakatla Indian Community. So this is on the Annette Island Reserve. Unfortunately, those folks weren't able to come and present to you today. And so they sent me their talk. I met with them. We talked story a little bit about what kind of things I could share. So first and foremost, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and contact these folks right down here. But I would like to give a shout out to them. If you've worked with any of these folks, Dustin Winter, he is the director of the Department of Fish and Wildlife for Metlakatla Indian Community. Ian Hudson is the new green crab program manager. He's born and raised on Metlakatla, used to be the science teacher down there as well. Nicole Reynolds is their new data analyst. And then Janelle Winter this says invasive species director, which I know is her official title, but if you've had the opportunity to work with Janelle in the past, you know that she is one of those does everything, makes everything happen on Metlakatla. I want to just share a little bit about the outline for the talk. This is kind of where we're going. Sorry, I realized that when I hit this, it moves. I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction to green crab, their impacts, their history, why are they here now in our region. We're going to talk timeline on how it manifested on Annette Island Reserve and what that timeline looks like, what it's looking like now. We're going to speak a little bit about other mitigation efforts from primarily other tribes, since that's the crew that I work with most directly in Southeast Alaska. Really look at what is the future? What does it look like with this highly invasive species coming into our nearshore environments now? And then if there's one thing I can leave you with, it's how to identify a green crab. So we're gonna hit that right at the end, and when you walk out of here today, you should be able to go on your beach walks with your friends or your dogs, and if you see one, you should know what it is and then know what to do. So we're gonna start with looking at some of the impacts from European green crab. Green crab, they can really permanently alter an entire ecosystem. In fact, on the global invasive species database list, they are listed within the top 100 most invasive species. So when they get into an environment, they really do have the potential to wreak havoc, and they can do this in a couple different ways. Mostly, they are voracious omnivores. They can and will eat anything. They're extremely hardy. They can live in all kinds of different environments. For many of our marine species, they need a certain salinity to be successful. Not so much these guys. They can live all the way up well into freshwater estuaries, really brackish, really near fresh water. These folks can live out of the water for days. So say you you find one and you're not sure what it is, you put it in a cooler, come back a couple days later, like it's still kicking. It doesn't even need to be in the water for days at a time. And because they're such voracious omnivores, they can really go through our habitats and they can eat all of the eelgrass and all of the kelp, and they're eating a lot of our native shellfish species. And just taking a picture that would look on your left, a lot of diversity in species, and making it look like what it looks like on the right, where there's like just green crab and it's just not as populous with other things. This is a map that shows the native range for European green crab, and that's going to be in blue. So they have a really large native range, right? They can be all the way in really northern European waters and also in North African waters. So these crabs can live in water that's pretty cold and then water that's pretty hot. So when we look at our waters here, in general, we're like, oh, we've got fairly cold water, but it's not cold enough for them. It's not cold enough to keep them out. And you can see this map shows that. The green shows the potential range for the species. And you can see that pretty much all the Gulf of Alaska is in green. We can probably get these green crab anywhere within the Gulf of Alaska. How did these green crabs get to where they're going? There's a couple different vectors that they may use. I'm going to speak about two of them. The first is currents that are transporting these planktonic crab up and down and around different coastlines. And the second is the transport of live or planktonic crab via human influences. So really this breaks down into things that aren't 100% our fault because we can't control the currents, and then things that have been influenced by humans moving things around. So we're going to talk about the currents transporting those planktonic crab first. And there's two different maps of currents here. This first one on your left here just shows some general currents kind of in the greater Pacific Ocean here. You can see we have that California current that kind of splits off and goes south, and then the Alaska current that splits off and goes north. But sort of right along the west coast coastline, so right along California, Oregon, and Washington, there's another current called the Davidson current. And that is running right up that coastline there. And that is very likely going to be one of our main transport mechanisms for bringing that planktonic crab up the coast. The second vector is human influence vectors. So these are things like transporting planktonic crab in ballast waters, large ships moving from place A to place B, picking up water in one place, dumping it in another place. If there was planktonic crab in there, then they can move those green crab around. Second is packaging material. So this is actually how green crab ended up on the West Coast in the first place. We were transporting live lobster from the East Coast to go to some fancy restaurants in California, and they were packaged in seaweed material. And when we pulled the lobster out and we needed to get rid of that seaweed material, we just kind of do what humans do and just kind of shove it to the side, and that's how we suspect the first green crab were introduced onto the West Coast. And another option would be shellfish transfers. So many states along the coast use shellfish as a way to test for harmful algal blooms and shellfish toxicity. And so what you may do is you may take shellfish from Bay A to Bay B, because now you want to test Bay B for toxins. And in that shellfish was either live crab or planktonic crab that you just moved from one place to another. So those are some potential ways that humans can influence the way these green crab might move around. I'm going to speak a little bit about the timeline, particularly how they got here on the West Coast. So European green crab have been on the East Coast since the 1800s. They've been on the East Coast for a lot longer compared to here on the West Coast. It wasn't until 1989, like I mentioned, with our transport of live lobsters, that they got to the West Coast in California. Throughout those mid-90 years, they started to sort of steadily march up the coast to Oregon and to Washington and some of those outer coast bays. This movement was particularly strong in El Nino years. So when there was a little bit of those warmer waters that were coming up, then those crab did a little bit better, and they were able to make sort of bigger jumps during those years. In the mid-2000s is when we see them get to the Salish Sea. So this is when we see them kind of take that right turn and then get down into the Salish Sea and Puget Sound and places like Seattle, where there's huge amounts of effort to really mitigate the impacts from green crab now. You can see in 2017 is when they were found on Dungeness Spit. And then in 2020 is when they were first found in Haida Gwaii. And Haida Gwaii is an island off the coast of Canada, and it is, sort of our southernmost neighbor right across Dixon Entrance. So that's when they were found in Haida Gwaii, and that really is what brings us to Metlakatla. The Metlakatla Indian Community, when they saw that Haida Gwaii had started to find green crab in their waters, that is what propelled Metlakatla Indian Community to say, we need to make some real effort to see if they're here, if they're coming, and what's going to bring them here. And so that's the start of the Metlakatla story here today. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Metlakatla is located on the Annette Island Reserve. It is the only native reserve in Alaska. It's one of our most southern islands here in Southeast Alaska. You can see on this map here, it's about 15 miles away from Ketchikan. There's about 1,500 folks who live in Metlakatla, and those folks have tribally managed hatcheries and fisheries. So that whole island is their reserve. I'm going to speak to you a little bit about their timeline, what they found in 2021 and 2022, so on and so forth. But first, I'm going to speak a little bit about the methods that they used, because I'll be referencing these things like, oh, they did a molt walk, and then they did some eDNA. So I just want to chat a little bit about what each one of those are. So one of the things you'll hear me say is molt walk or carapace walk. And so this is when you're just walking along the beach and you're looking for crab carapaces, so just that outer shell of that crab. You're trying to look for your crab and then ID it. Particularly, they're of course looking for green crab, but this is a really powerful tool to look for native crab as well. And a little bit further along in my talk, you'll see how other tribes throughout Southeast Alaska use this tool very readily. The second is eDNA sampling. How many of us have heard of eDNA sampling? Yeah, I figured it'd be an audience of lots of hands on the eDNA. So this is where you can actually take just a water sample and you can send it in, and us as live creatures, fish, things in the ocean, they would be like shedding DNA all the time, right? And if you can take a little sample, a little water sample, then you can test it and see if there's presence or absence of that species in that water. And so this is a tool that folks are really interested in using, because being able to go out and just scoop up some water and send it to a lab for testing is certainly less time consumptive than having to send a whole crew out into the field to set traps and pull them and check them every day. So they have used eDNA for looking for green crab. They also do something called prospect trapping. And so prospect trapping on Metlakatla and other places is where maybe they suspect that there's green crab in an area. Maybe they did a molt walk and they found 1 or 2 molts, or someone reported like, oh, I think I saw some green crab in this area. So they'll take some traps, they'll head to that area, they'll set around 20 traps, check them every day for just a couple days and see if they come up with anything. So this is a great method because they're able to not deploy a ton of effort into one area, and then they can move it from area to area to cover a little bit more ground. So they're able to check more places. And then there's removal trapping. In some spaces, you'll hear things like functional eradication. This is a lot of what Metlakatla on Annette Island has been doing, where we know there's a lot of crab in this one place, and the only way to get them is to put a lot of traps in the water, check them every day, and pull them out. And of course, this takes a whole crew of people. It takes a lot of time. You're out there kind of no matter the tides, no matter the weather, and so it can be really, really difficult work. And then finally, disposal. As I mentioned before, these green crab are hardy. The folks in Metlakatla have all kinds of stories of they catch them, they put them in the freezer, because they want to kill them. They pull them out of the freezer and they're ready to put them in the compost. And they're like still alive. They like reconstitute. And so now they catch them, they freeze them, they smash them, and then they put them in the compost pile. And that's that's a lot more successful. But yeah, can you imagine like you go in the freezer and then you come back and you're good? Like that's how hardy these green crabs are. So we're gonna start in 2021. So like I mentioned, Haida Gwaii found those green crab in 2020. that really prompted Metlakatla Indian Community. They went out and they procured funding so they could start looking at these crabs. This is a map of all the places that they looked, whether it was molt walks, eDNA, or that prospect trapping in 2021. So you can see they're mostly focusing their efforts on the southern part of the island. And that's because with that Davidson current that we saw coming up, they expect most of that planktonic crab, if they're being deposited in those bays, they're more likely going to be on that southern edge. And so even in their first year, you can see all the different places that they looked. Luckily, in 2021, they did not find any crab carapaces or live crab. That only lasted a year. In 2022, they did find both their first crab carapace and their first live crab. And so their first crab carapace was found on July 19th in Colby Creek. And so for those of you who live here in Southeast Alaska or live in coastal Alaska, it was a really big deal. Like the KTOO came out, lots of other local newspaper stories came out, and it was like, what do we do now? Like, they've been found, what happens next? And we're really, really lucky that the folks on Annette Island and Metlakatla Indian Community had already procured those funding, have already procured those traps and the training. They were ready to respond as soon as they found them. And so they found the carapace. It was actually a student intern who found the carapace. And she had been listening to a story from her grandfather about how you should actually be looking a little bit higher up on the beach than you think. Maybe animals move it, or the really, really high tides come in and push it up. And so they were looking a little bit higher than they thought they needed to, and then that's where they found the green crab. And then it was only a few days later where they found 5 live green crab in a traditional salmon trap as well. And so that was the start of the 2022 season for them. And like I said, they were prepared, they were ready to go. And in that year, they found their first one to capturing over 700. And they mostly found them in this area that they call Coast Guard Beach, which is a little bit down here. So the carapace was found here, the first live crab were found here, but most of the crab were catched down here. So moving into 2023, they had already worked out their systems a little bit. They knew they were going to find crab. They started a little bit earlier in the year, and they found over 2,000 that year. So they found 700 the year before, and next year they found 2,000. That starts to feel a little demoralizing, like, oh, how are we ever going to stay ahead of this? One of the things that they did to stay ahead of it is they hosted a workshop. They hosted this workshop where folks from all over Southeast Alaska came to learn and work beside them on the beaches that they were finding green crabs. So there was folks from Petersburg, from Cake, from Sitka, folks all over Prince of Wales, from Ketchikan. Many of us are in this photo here where we went and learned these protocols so we could bring them back to our communities and we could implement them here as well. And so even though they found a lot more crab that year, they were able to do so much knowledge sharing to really perpetuate and push everybody else forward. Some other work they did in 2023 was look at the genetics. They were able to do some genetic work for green crab. And so on this picture here, you can see the purple circle. This is green crab from Annette Island. The purple triangle is green crab from Haida Gwaii. And then green squares and diamonds is the genetic signature for crab from Vancouver Island and down into Washington. And when you take that genetic information and you plot it up, what you can see is some pretty tight clustering, actually. So you can see in this graph here, all of the green squares and green diamonds, their genetic structure all plots here. And for the Haida Gwaii, it's a little bit more spread out, but all the purple triangles are here. And what we see when we look at the purple circles is that they cluster with both. They cluster with both Vancouver Island crab as well as crab from Haida Gwaii, which brings us to think that we have 2 sources of crab in Metlakatla. We have planktonic crab that are coming up both from Vancouver and also from Haida Gwaii. So what does that mean? Does that mean they'll breed and form some sort of super crab? Does that mean they'll sort of stay separate? As much of the work we do here in Alaska, we don't know yet. We're going to have to do more work and learn more, but we were able to see that, yes, we're definitely having multiple waves of invasion. that brings us to this summer, 2024. Overall, they caught about 1,400 crab. So first, that's less. They found less crab in 2024 than they did in 2023, which is good. They had to set, nearly 5,000 traps. So if anyone has ever done work where you're setting the crab traps, it's not like a 20-second endeavor to set these traps. It is a lot of work. You're out there every day. You're dealing with some stinky bait because crabs like stinky stuff. So to set 5,000 traps in a year is a huge effort for the folks at Metlakatla to put in. But in the areas that were trapped in 2023 and were trapped in 2024, there was a 75% reduction in catch rates. So that is huge. That leads us to believe there's a little bit of a light maybe at the end of the tunnel, that maybe some of these mitigation efforts are actually working. If you look at this graph down here, it has the number of crabs caught per day by trap method. So you can see this kind of salmon colored here is by doing a beach set. This green is hand removal, and this blue is skiff set, so when they're doing it off the boat. And when you look at this graph, pretty much overall, you're like, oh, they sure picked up a lot of crab in 2024. And that was because they had, again, every year is different. They had sort of like crab coming into a new space. So this past summer, I mentioned that prospect trapping that they do, where they go across and go to some different places and just check to see what's going on. And they went to Point Davidson, or Point D Saltchuck, which is on the southern part of the island here. So it's just down here. Tamgas Bay, where I was showing you before, is up here. They just went down there to check things out. They went down there, they set a couple traps. At first they weren't finding anything, and then they looked down. They were like kind of, doing what you do when you go to the beach and you're tide pulling, you're looking at stuff. And there was hundreds of little crab, of little juvenile crab crawling all around. And I think there are some folks in this room. Can you raise your hand if you're from Metlakatla? Yeah, we've got a Metlakatla crew in the back. I know some of you had mentioned to me that you had gone out. Yeah, you had gone out and picked up the little crab. And then I know that they're here. I don't know if they're here in the audience. Is there anyone? Keenan, is your crew here from the, yeah, you guys went out here too, right? Yeah, Ian was telling me, so the Science Bowl crew in Ketchikan, which good to see you folks again, they had the opportunity to go out here and see the little crabs crawling around and be pulling them out of the water. So thank you you guys are all concentrated on the back right. Thank you for your efforts. They hand removed almost 1,000 of these juvenile crabs, like just picking them up from the rocks. And based on the size that they are, they expect, that those crabs, effectively were born there, whether they came in as planktonic crabs or, their parents gave birth to them in this salt chuck and they lived their whole life there. In fact, this area here is like super classic, super narrow entrance where all that planktonic crab can come in on the tide. And then once you're in here, like if you're a crab, where are you going to go? Like you're not going anywhere. This is where you live your whole life. And so they think that those crabs were effectively, born this past spring, and then by this fall, they were finding them in about this size. Kind of interesting is Metlakatla's smallest crab they've ever found was found here at about 8 millimeters, and then the largest crab they've ever found was also found here at about 80 millimeters. So that area is good for breeding green crab. There were some other things that happened in 2024. There was green crab found outside of the Annette Island Reserve. And so they was found in Bostwick Inlet, which is, this is Metlakatla. Here's Bostwick Inlet. It's on Gravina. So if you fly in and out of Ketchikan, Gravina is the island that the plane lands on, and then you got to wait for that ferry to take you every 30 minutes to and forth to Ketchikan. And that's where they found green crab there. And so once they found carapaces there, they did a trapping effort where they went and they set a handful of traps to try to catch, to see how big of an impact is this. And it was, they only found 2. And since then, there's been a couple other efforts where they went and deployed an early detection and rapid response plan where we've got sets of traps queued up all over Southeast Alaska. And they went and set over 100 traps to see how many they could get. And when they did that later in the fall, they found about 30. So just a quick all years recap. Overall, the folks in Metlakatla have found, just under 5,000 European green crab. But as I mentioned, they're looking okay. It's not all doom and gloom. They found less green crab in 2024 than they did in 2023. They're hoping that means that the mitigation efforts that they're employing are working. But this is going to take more work. We're going to have to be working at this for a really long time. One of the things that was sort of initiated was this community outreach. And so there's a European Green Crab Awareness Day. And actually, many communities from across coastal Alaska have adopted this. It's July 19th. It's in honor of the day the first carapace was found. And so on that day, you can go out and you can do a molt walk. You can go out and just look for crabs. You can talk to your friends about the impacts of European green crab. It's just to get the word out to all of us who live in coastal Alaska. Because of all the great work that Metlakatla has been doing, tribes around the region have said, okay, well, we know they're coming other places, we've seen them come in other places, and so I'm just going to speak a little bit about some efforts that other tribes have done in their places. So this is speaking about a European green crab field blitz that we conducted on Prince of Wales Island in mid-June. So these are all the environmental staff that I work with from the 4 tribes on Prince of Wales and also in Ketchikan Indian Community. When we did this field blitz, we worked with all those tribes, and then we also worked with Alaska Youth Stewards based out of Craig, and we had some Sea Alaska interns and also some U.S. Forest Service staff as well. We were able to do this. We were able to go to 8 different beaches. We conducted, sorry, my slides are messed up. Why did we want to do this field blitz? First of all, we wanted to look for green crab. They're on Metlakatla, they're on Gravina. Could they be on Prince of Wales Island? And we wanted to also catalog and document the native crab species because that's going to be incredibly important. If we can understand what that baseline is, what the data looks like, what this crab species look like before green crab come in, we can better understand the impacts they're having. And we also wanted to, spend time together because when you live in Southeast, right, sometimes we feel like in our work we live on a metaphorical island and we're always sort of doing things by ourselves. For us, we live on actual islands, and so we don't get to interact all the time. So it's nice when we can get together, work together, and have fun. We were able to complete 8 different surveys, on 8 different beaches, complete almost 50 surveys. We found 9 different crab species, none of which were green crab, and we collected over 1,000 crab molts from those beaches. And I just wanted to share with you a couple of pictures that really capture why we're doing this. If you've never been to Prince of Wales, you got to go. It's an incredible place. It's incredibly beautiful. There are football fields of beach asparagus. I mean, huge. I mean, it's incredible. This is a picture from Whalehouse Beach by Kasan. And on this one little space, this one little rock, there's sea cucumbers, sea stars, gumboots, mussels, urchins, it's so full of life. It's incredible. And we know that with European green crab, if they come into that area, that it wouldn't even take too long until this rock that's so full of life could possibly be decimated. And as I mentioned, it's always great to get to work together. So these are just a handful of pictures of the different tribal environmental staff being out in the field. I always think pictures like this are funny. The pictures look like it was sunny and nice, but then everyone's in the down coats in June. I'm I remember it was kind of cold, but it looked sunny that day. One of the things we were able to create from this was some crab ID kits. And so we were able to capture, the 1,000 molts. We took them home, we cleaned them up, and we were able to make crab ID kits to distribute to different communities. And in fact, there's a group of Razor students here. Can you raise your hand if you're a Razor student? Yeah, there's a handful of us. Those are the kits you use, the crabs that we picked up off the beach in Prince of Wales. So we're really excited that those kits are going to, be able to perpetuate that education, through both space and time. But what does the future of European green crab in Alaska look like? It can be kind of tough to carry and to hold because, in the state of Alaska, we've got, 30,000 miles of coastline in Southeast Alaska alone, over 15. we've got so many islands, and a lot of it is in incredibly remote and rural places. How are we possibly supposed to have, trap lines in every bay? And the true answer is we probably can't. We probably can't be monitoring every single bay, but what we can do is think about the areas that are really, really important and are accessible, and where can we go? This is a map from Shore Zone that just has potential European green crab habitat where they might go. And you can see in that green, there's a lot of it. And even though there's a lot of it, the folks from Metlakatla have shown us that trapping efforts can be successful and that they can work and that there's more work to be done. Some of the next steps that particularly the folks in Metlakatla are looking to employ are they're going to continue that environmental eDNA research and really see if that's a tool that works well to understand if crabs are in a bay versus if they're not. There's some telemetry research they're looking at starting to use, and this is where you put little GPS trackers on crabs and see where they go, so you can better understand their movements, how deep they're going, how shallow they're going, maybe when and where they're breeding. Genetic and stomach content analysis. So one of the things we're worried about is that they're going to consume a lot of our native shellfish species, and so some of this work will let us know, is that actually what they're eating? And then finally, some crabs-zoea monitoring, so we can kind of use that as a tool to know if we can find some super planktonic crab in places and then get an idea if that's a place, within the next year we need to be potentially setting traps or doing molt walks. Okay, so I mentioned that the most important thing is that you walk out of here knowing how to identify a green crab. So if you want to put the timeline down, if you want to put the impacts down, this is what you should carry out of here with you today. So when you want to identify a European green crab, the most important things to think about are going to be they have a really distinct spines on their carapace. So there's going to be 5 on the left or right side, and there's going to be 3 in the middle. So you can think of this as a 5-3-5 pattern. Sometimes they are green, but often they are not. So you do not want to use color as a way to specifically distinguish your green crab. And the adults never get much larger than your fist. So if you find a really big crab on the beach, it's probably not a green crab. But anything your fist and smaller could be a potential candidate. Because I want you to be able to ID green crab, it's also important that you can ID a couple of good green crabs. So we've got lots of crabs that are green, and we should not be walking around on the intertidal smashing anything we see that's green that's a crab. So here's just a couple that if you see, you should not smash and say thank you for your services. So here is a kelp crab. It's also very green. It's going to be some of them are a little bit smaller, and they're going to be longer than they are wide. So that's a good way to think about your kelp crab. We've got some helmet crabs here. Helmet crabs have a really distinct body shape. They can also kind of have some green and some orange hairs on them on their body. So if you see any orange hairs, you can think that's probably not a European green crab. There's some other crabs. Let's see if I can get the slide to change. All right, a shore crab. So these shore crabs, they can be lots of different colors, but they have 3 spines on that left and right side. So you got to keep in mind the European green crab are going to have 5, and these have 3. These are often going to be a lot smaller than some of the green crab you might find. If you do find a green crab, or you find a crab that you're not sure about, you can always call the invasive species line. What we really want you to do is go ahead and take a picture of it. Take a picture of it, make note of where you are. You can call the invasive species hotline, and you'll get connected with someone who can help you through those next steps. Pretty much all the tribes, the environmental program, tribal staff in Southeast have been trained on how to ID a green crab, what it looks like, what areas we expect it in. So you could always contact your local tribe, and they can walk through with you whether or not it's probably a green crab. And then another good place to go is to connect with, her name is Tammy Davis. She's our invasive species coordinator for the entire state of Alaska, for all invasive species, for all aquatic and marine species, but she'll be able to help you out as well. So those are some places you can go. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to test you on if you can identify the green crab. So what I'm going to do is I've got just a couple, 4 or 5 slides. When I'm going to move to the slide, and then you're just gonna observe, you're gonna count the spines, you're gonna see what color it is, but don't shout it out. Hold that for yourself, and then I'll count down 3, 2, 1, and then you'll just shout out whether you think A or B is a green crab. So remember, don't shout until I start counting, okay? So I'm gonna change the slide, and you're just gonna observe which one you think the green crab is. All right, when you think you got it, I'm gonna count down. 3, 2, 1. B. Oh, wow, yeah. And so what are you seeing here? You can just shout it out. 5 spines. Yep, I told you to count, and you counted. Yep. Body shape, it's a little more hexagonal, or it's a little bit wider. Does anyone know what A is? Ooh, Dungy, red rock. Yeah, I think we have this one as a red rock. It's got those really classic black tips on the end. Super hard to tell. It's just a picture, and it's far away. Red rock on A. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those ones can get pretty big, too. They can get pretty honking. Yes, those are a native crab, yeah. All right, we're going to do it again. So remember, I'm going to switch the slide. Don't yell out. All right, 3, 2, 1. A. What is B? Yeah, shore crab, yeah. If you were just to describe these pictures to someone and they couldn't see them, you'd be like, they're green and they have some yellow on them. And there's if you were just to describe it with words, it'd be pretty similar. So we want to make sure we're counting those spines. And shore crab, they're going to get a lot smaller. They're not going to get as big as some of the green crab as well. But you can start to see some of that coloration here, where that green crab there is getting pretty yellow. Okay, I'm going to switch the slide. Don't yell it out. Think about it. Uh-oh, none of those are green at all. 3, 2, 1. B. Yeah, B. Does anyone know what is A? Yeah, Dungy. So that 10th spine is going to be the longest one out. That's what we like to catch in our crab pots. But you can see this European green crab is red, is orange, is really not green at all. And typically that means it hasn't molted in a while. And oftentimes you'll see females that are a little more red than green because they'll maybe saving up their energy instead of the metabolic energy it takes to molt. They're going to save those so they can get ready and have their babies. All right, I'm going to switch the slide. 3, 2, 1. A. Yep, so that's another green crab. So you all are ready to go. You're ready to go out to your beaches. You would never misidea a native crab species for a green crab. If you do, that's okay. Just take a picture of it and send it to someone at your local tribe or at ADF&G, and they can help you work through that ID. With that, I'd like to say, thanks very much. Huge thank you to the folks in Metlakatla Indian Community. Literally, they gave me these slides. We talked through it. This is their story, not mine. I'm humbled and honored that they allowed me to share some of it today. So big thank you to those folks and to the many other partners that you see. I think if you live in coastal Alaska, we're going to be hearing about green crab forever. I don't think we'll ever not hear about it. So, it's get on the train, get ready, and let's all go ID green crab and let folks know where it is so we can put traps in the water and do the best mitigation efforts we can. So thank you.
Thank you, Kari. So questions for Kari?
Hi. Sorry. I'm just curious, are there any other species of crab that do have that same number of spines? And then also, should we not kill them if we find them and just report them, or kill them and report them?
So I have a question for the audience. Is there anyone who works for ADF&G in the room? Okay, so the official protocol is technically, because they are an invasive species, what you are supposed to do is you are able to capture and retain one. You're not supposed to do anything with it. You're supposed to take a picture of it, send that to ADF&G, and then they're going to help you confirm that ID, because what we don't want is folks going out and just killing native crabs all over the place. And so that's what you are supposed to do. As far as, are there any crab in the world that have that 535? I don't know, but it is definitely the distinguishing feature that people ask you to look for. So I think if you see that 535 here, you're very likely looking at the green crab. So if you can find it, put it in a cooler. Like I said, it's going to live in there. It's going to be fine for days and days. Call ADF&G, call your local tribe. But the official path forward is you're not supposed to just decimate it, and you're not supposed to bring it anywhere. But if it was me and I found it on the beach, I'd grab it, I put it in my cooler, and I would take it off the beach.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
My question is, how far do you expect European green crabs to go up the coast of Alaska in the next 10 or so years?
Oh, well, this feels like a cop-out answer. Short answer, I don't know. There's so much that we don't know about it. Certainly what we can say is based on what we expect there to be for thresholds to keep the population down, like things like temperature, everywhere in the Gulf of Alaska is potential habitat in that regard. There's not going to be something that totally, is icing them out and is keeping them out. In the next 10 years, do I think we're going to find them on Prince of Wales Island in the next couple of years? Yes. In fact, there was a carapace that was found on Kasan Island, which is just a small island outside of Kasan. And it was actually found the day after the whole crew that I was with was there. And so if they're there, are they likely in other bays that just aren't being monitored regularly? Probably. Are we going to see them do funny things like skip Sitka Sound and all of a sudden end up in Yakutat because the way the currents move and the way a big storm system came through in the summer? It's possible. So I certainly don't know. That's one of the things people are working really hard to know. But I think if you are in a south-facing bay in Southeast Alaska and you want to better understand if your subsistence resources are going to be impacted by European green crab, it's a good idea to kind of get out there and start documenting what you have now.
Hi. My question for you is what has it looked like in places like the Salish Sea or on Haida Gwaii? What kinds of mitigation efforts have been going on, and how successful do those seem to be? And what kind of funding has come into those efforts?
It really depends on where you are. The invasions look different in every place that they show up. So when I showed you that timeline, there have been green crab off the outer coast of Oregon and Washington since the mid-1990s, and then coming into the 2000s is when we started to see things in the Salish Sea and Puget Sound. And there are places where they found green crab. They trapped them. They caught 5. And then they trapped really hard, and they put all those traps in the water, and they came back, and they never found them again. It was not a death sentence for that environment. And then there are places like Haida Gwaii that found them for the first time in 2020 and have since pulled out over 1 million. So every invasion, depending on where you are, can look different. As far as funding structures go, certainly Washington did an emergency measure that they passed, which freed up millions of dollars of funding to be able to use towards mitigation efforts for green crab. And so, as the state of Alaska, if that was something we wanted to do, is write letters and say, hey, we think this is an issue, this is really going to impact our fisheries. If there was some sort of emergency declaration, that would open up funding. But other than that, it's piecemeal funding that individual, whether they're agencies or tribes, are looking for to fuel their staff to do the mitigation efforts, which is incredibly expensive and incredibly time-consuming.
You mentioned that there was green crab on the East Coast. Are they doing the same thing to try to eradicate them there, or is they just letting them run wild?
It depends where you are. They've been on the East Coast for a really, really long time. And so there are some places that have just been pretty overrun. There are some places similar to Puget Sound, like I mentioned, where they came in and they're able to find some homeostasis with the other native species. And again, it's not a complete death sentences for all the near shores. And then there are places that have been pretty decimated. On the East Coast, there are some other crab species like the blue crab that just beat green crab up. And so when you have some of your larger crab species that can keep them at bay, that can be really helpful. And so if you are setting crab traps, if you have that tool accessible to you and you're catching large dungees or large red rock, you're probably in an environment that, at least right now at this stage of the invasion, you're not going to find green crab because those bigger crab are going to push them out. So it's really site dependent.
I think you just mentioned a lot of what I was going to ask, but are there any local species that have been successful or that we know of that are kind of killing those crabs or eating them or anything?
We do know that some of those larger species, at least for the way things have manifested in the Salish Sea, that if there's large adult dungees, is that what the green crab are going to do is they're going to pick somewhere else to go. And because they're so flexible, you're not going to find a dungy in an estuary, right? They don't want to live in near wholly fresh water, but the green crab can. So typically what we see is those green crab move up until they're in such high numbers that they then sort of flush out into where you would see your larger crabs. So that's one of the things we're really worried about in places that are like dungy nurseries, like Tamgas Harbor. Tamgas Bay is a dungy nursery for the Annette Island Reserve. And so we're worried that they get established and then their numbers are so high that they're then able to be competitive with even the larger dungees. That is all. Sorry.
Right, that's all we have time for today. But if you would like to talk to Kari more, all of the speakers are around WhaleFest, and so you can find them and talk more. But thank you so much, Kari.